Welcome to a CUNY TV virtual roundtable discussion. What is the new normal for New York City? I'm Mike Gilliam. Summer has come and gone, and while it has abated to a degree, the coronavirus pandemic is still with us. We've seen huge challenges and changes over the last 6 months. At least 190,000 people have died in the U.S. Unemployment figures are improving, but about 1 in 5 New Yorkers are still out of work. Bus ridership is down now that the MTA is once again charging fares, while subway ridership is going up. All of this at a time when many of us are working remotely from home. That has left the huge office towers of Manhattan virtually empty, while companies rethink whether they will ever bring all of their workers back or pay for all of the expensive real estate. This has in turn hurt the small businesses that depend on commuters and workers for their income. Speaking of real estate, there are countless stories of New Yorkers bailing out and moving to the suburbs and driving up home prices outside of the city. In July, there was a 44% increase in home sales in the counties surrounding the city over the last year's figures. And the number was 112% in Westchester. So when the smoke clears, what will the new normal be in New York? Here to help us see a clearer picture of what our city might look like in the months and years to come, we have the executive director of the Center for an Urban Future, Jonathan Bowles, American political scientist, author, and professor in the Department of Political Science at Queens College, Andrew Hacker, and the dean of the Baruch College Marxe School of Public and International Affairs, David Birdsell. Welcome to all of you. David, let's start with you. Will New York bounce back to the pre-pandemic New York we all know?
I think New York will bounce back. Whether it will be the pre-pandemic New York is very much an open question. We are probably going to see significantly more in the way of commercial vacancy after we get, let's just stipulate, a vaccine that's effective and think about that as the environment, at least that I'll respond to right now. But there could be some virtues that come along with some of those changes. A lot depends on what happens between now and whenever that new normal catches hold in terms of investments. Right now, the governor has on ask a $59 billion bailout package, which would go a long way, not just toward restoring empty pocketbooks in the city, but toward making critical infrastructure investments and perhaps significant improvements in MTA and other operations that could make the city more accessible in a literal sense, but also a fairer place. So one of the things we need to keep a very careful eye on is what happens between now and whenever that new normal is. But we have a prospect of having a city that animates all the things that it is well known for, but does so in a way that is more inclusive and does so in a way that takes some of the light off of Manhattan and shines it in other corners of the outer boroughs in ways, again, that sort of feed that narrative of inclusivity. The challenges are serious, but the prospects are, in my view, bright.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, a lot of it does depend on money. And Jonathan, if we don't get that money, what happens?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. I think we all worry that a fiscal crisis could mean cuts to the very things that make this city great, like a functioning transit system. You know, if we don't have money to keep that going 24 hours and in good repair, that's not good news for New York. Culture, you know, our museums, our performing arts centers, they are badly hit by this because they rely so much on earned revenue and people aren't coming in and going in to the numbers that they were before. But that's so important for attracting smart, talented people from around the world, which in turn attracts companies here. Immigrants, which have been so important to the city's rise over the past few decades and contribute to so many key industries and walks of life in the city. Numbers of new immigrants coming to the city in recent years has fallen, thanks in part to the really awful policies we're seeing out of Washington. But you know, we're also seeing immigrants hit incredibly hard by this crisis. They are disproportionately affected by the industries that have the most layoffs in this pandemic. We did a rough analysis of this and found that it could be in some neighborhoods as many as half of immigrants that are out of work right now. So, you know, because of money and the overall economic issues that I mentioned, we could be seeing some real difficulties for some of the key assets for this city.
Andrew, we bounced back from the financial crises of the 70s and 80s. We bounced back from 9/11. Do you see us bouncing back from this?
Of course, New York is going to bounce back. You can't have New York without New Yorkers. And I have a very simple definition of New Yorker: somebody who wants to live here. There are a lot of people who are born and brought up here and don't like it. They move to the suburbs, they move to Colorado Springs, they move to San Diego, and I say, have a nice trip. Because out there in Bangalore, in Beirut, in Kiev, are millions of people who want to be New Yorkers. And they'll come in any circumstance. Let me give you an example of this. Remember when Gerald Ford said to New York, drop dead? And not long thereafter, we had crime all over the place. I think in one year there were 3,000 people killed. During that very time, who came into New York voluntarily? Koreans. And what they did was they opened Korean produce stores. What? They saw a need for this? And not only that, they did better than the Italians before. Remember the way the Koreans would stack up their oranges in an aesthetic way? You know, added something to the city. There's another group that's going to come along as the Koreans did. You said I was an emeritus. Oh no, I taught a class this morning. A class where the students were named Chan and Kim and Singh, where there were Ahmed from the Middle East. These are all New Yorkers. They're going to be our next generation. They have cousins out there in wherever countries they come from who are going to come here. And believe me, first of all, we're not going to have Trump forever. Once Biden is president, and it's an absolute certainty, I'm speaking as a political scientist, it'll be much easier for people to come in illegally, which is what keeps New York going. It's not legal immigrants, for goodness sakes. Okay.
Okay. Let's tackle this whole work from home issue, because that has become a very large thing in the scheme of things here right now. A lot of people say, hey, I'm much more efficient working from home. Things are working out fine for me. But do you see it as working well for the city? Is work at home, remote working, is it really working?
I taught a class this morning working from home, and I loved it, and the students did too. I used to have a class with 35 students in 4 rows. I could never really get in touch with the people in the back row. Now I have them in their little circles in the class. I'm getting to know them individually as I never did before. So I realize there's a lot to be said for campus life, but I really think higher education is adapting well to the situation we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, you know, I think that we don't know exactly how it's going to play out because, first of all, I don't think that everybody's going to want to work from home. First of all, a lot of folks in the cramped Manhattan apartments or Brooklyn apartments or wherever across the city, you know, it's difficult to work from home all the time. And I think people are realizing this right now. Where I live in Forest Hills, Queens, we hear leaf blowers and lawn mowers all the time, and it's difficult to concentrate and get my work done. And so, you know, I think people in the suburbs that, you know, I think it's not so easy just to decamp to Westchester or other places because you hear those same noises there. And I don't think everyone's going to want to work from home, but we may see people working from home more than they are now. I think the question is, will companies in finance, in tech, who I think are committing to New York still, but will they do some of their growing elsewhere? Will they, now that people can work from home, will they have, you know, more of their workforce in Salt Lake, in Dallas, in Chicago, in other places where people want to live and frankly are less expensive, where there may be more space for people to work from home? That could be a problem for New York. You know, I think there's other issues as well.
David, I think there are trade-offs. You know, I kind of like not having to put on the tie and all of that to go into the city every day. But at the same time, I kind of miss it. Are there some things that we lose by not being in the office?
Oh, sure. I think that we lose, first and foremost, serendipity. We have to make plans to see someone inside the bezel, and we don't need to make plans to see someone in the hallway. In fact, they're almost by definition chance encounters. So that kind of creative energy that many businesses prize, that many academic and cultural organizations prize, really goes away if you're living your life entirely online. I do think, extending on a point that Jonathan made just a moment ago, that we don't really know where this is going to wind up. We have been through about 6 months of online living, and that's significant experience to be sure, but we haven't been through a significant set of promotion cycles. We haven't seen people try to establish new organizational leadership roles inside the bezel. And I think these are very much open questions about whether people can develop the kind of social capital at work that they're able to do face to face. Can that be thoroughly in all dimensions of your work life replicated online? The last thing that I'd like to say is that we have to pay close attention to the very big holes in our digital infrastructure. There are close to 1 million households in Manhattan that are not wired for, New York overall, that are not wired for broadband at this stage. The people who live in those areas, sometimes it's building by building, in other areas it's district by district, but are profoundly disadvantaged in terms of the workforce. And it should come as no surprise that that varies directly with income level and is much more likely to affect people of color than people in wealthier and whiter neighborhoods in the city. So we have profound recovery issues that speak to many of the questions that have been raised by my colleagues on the panel earlier about equity and how we recover. And a lot of that is going to require not just returning to the status quo ante, but a better system that allows people to participate in those areas of the economy that remain largely remote, should they in fact adopt that posture going forward after we have a vaccine and a plausible recovery.
My teaching, I think, is just about as good as it used to be, but something is missing. At Queens College, I would have lunch. It's not a fancy faculty club, but a branch of the cafeteria. And I found myself seated with people from physics, from literature, from philosophy, and I got to know what they were doing. They asked me, and we really broadened ourselves without even having an agenda when we sat down for lunch. So for that reason, I want the campus to open again, definitely, ASAP.
If you have a lot of remote working and people are not in those towers in Manhattan, that is a bad thing for the businesses, the small businesses in Manhattan, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we're already seeing that. I mean, the Manhattan businesses, particularly the central business districts, have kind of hit the losing trifecta. You know, it's not only all the office workers that are not there, not having lunch, not having a drink after work, but it's also the tourists are missing from Manhattan, and also in a lot of the neighborhoods around those central business districts, you have more affluent residents, many of whom have also left the city, at least temporarily. So it's a real bad scene right now, and I think that we need to see a 5-borough economy. We need to see those kind of Manhattan businesses. And you know, one of the things that we may see another challenge going forward is business travel. You know, with Zoom and other things. The tourism economy is going to be slow to get back to normal. Now, some of this is not such a bad thing, and I think that we're going to see more decentralization of offices across the city. I think some people may not want to work from home, but they might want to work closer to home, or at least part of the time. We may see corporations develop satellite offices. We may see an expansion of the co-working spaces that were already happening. I mean, it's a good thing if people are maybe not all crowding on the subways, but instead, you know, taking scooters and bikes and other things and buses to their jobs nearer to where they live. But I think that does create some consequences for Manhattan, particularly some of those small businesses there.
Let's take it to the outer boroughs, because a lot of the damage that's been done during the pandemic has actually happened to commercial areas outside of Manhattan, correct?
That's absolutely right. It's a mixed picture outside of Manhattan, because you do have relatively higher rates of home sales and new rentals in relatively leafier areas of Brooklyn and Queens than you do in Manhattan at this stage, where the drop has been most precipitous. But it's again this question of who's there to consume the services that are available and to propel that activity. In some respects, some of those neighborhoods are doing well because people aren't in Manhattan and they're spending closer to home. So all of this has to evolve. I do want to draw a very sharp and bright line that if we're talking about a new normal in, again, a stipulated environment, that we have a vaccine, that the vaccine is successful, that it doesn't produce other side effects that are deleterious for health, and that we're beginning to get back to something that's past this moment. We don't want to think of this moment as durable at the point that we can actually emerge from lockdown in a healthy and safe way. And that's the environment that I'm trying to think about and what we look forward to. The transit to that period matters a whole lot, and how we're able to hold up, and whether there will be massive federal investments, which we absolutely need if this is not going to take 5-6 years to recover from, but look more like 2-4 years to recover from, and to get to this point of the new normal that we're all imagining right now.
Do you believe things look very dire over the next year and a half or so?
I think things are going, a huge amount depends on federal policy. But we could imagine, with all of the attention to equity right now and the appropriate investments, a surge of new activity that would actually make the city a more equitable and an equally rewarding place to live, even if it looks a little bit different from the gilded New York of the Bloomberg era and stretching on to the first de Blasio administration and into the beginnings of a second.
We had a pandemic before. The pandemic was 3,000 people being killed a year, graffiti on the subway. You remember that graffiti would just make you feel totally powerless. The fact that the city was losing population the first time. You know, we had that pandemic and we got over it. The chief reason we got over it, which I suggested, was new social capital came in. Social capital in the form of ambitious immigrants or ambitious people in the arts. For example, we had the gay revolution in New York, you know, and that was arts, design, and so on. We had probably the largest gay population in the world when you think of it, and that was social capital also. So the pandemic is going to, as old pandemics, even the 1918, 1919 flu, they wind down, and after that, there'll be the rebuilding. And I realize, sure, there's going to need funds from the federal government, but I wouldn't push that far, because the capital we create within the city itself is far more important than how many $1 billion we can get from Washington.
As we talk about Manhattan again and getting back into what's going on there, they've recently said that restaurants who have been suffering terribly are now going to be able to have indoor dining, but at only 25% capacity. Is that going to be enough when we get into the winter months to sustain them?
I don't know. I have a lot of different thoughts about the indoor dining. I really worry that the thing that could really trip New York the most, at least in the immediate or middle term, is for the virus to come roaring back. You know, the images of New York around the world from March and April was awful for the city. For tourists around the world, for business folks. New York was the poster child for the tragedy that we're seeing here. And the fact that we've turned it around so much is really important for this city. And I think we should be broadcasting how well New York's done. And I worry about it coming back. And so, but those restaurants and other small businesses are operating at a fraction of the income they were before. They need everything they can get. I wish that policymakers right now were thinking very clearly about what are those things that we could do to help small businesses and restaurants get through this. Indoor dining, I don't think we're going to see more than 25%. And I'm not convinced it's going to last even at that level, especially if the virus starts to come back. But there are other things we could be trying. And we need to be planning for that now, because we've only got another month or so of warm weather left in New York City. And, we may be thinking about how in Paris, in parts of Las Vegas, they have outdoor heaters for restaurants. But there may be other solutions that allow for small businesses to get through, and not just restaurants, but maybe like cultural organizations as well. We've got to be having those conversations and having creative solutions right now. To answer your question, there's going to be real tragedy in the small business sector in New York.
And David, what about Broadway? Do you see that coming back? Because that has been one of the engines that has driven Manhattan.
It is hard to see any kind of live event spaces coming back online until there's a vaccine. The nature of the seating is such that you can't put even 25% of the seating in play that you would have had under normal circumstances. I know when we've done these analyses on raked classrooms, and of course most theater spaces are steeply raked, you can only go to about 20% before you put people at risk of inhaling aerosolized contaminants. So that's going to be, I think, the hardest nut to crack. Other cultural institutions can and already are coming back. We have planned for reopening museums now. Many of them have opened their doors, and we can see that beginning to climb back. I do think we should be very clear that some of the costs that might scale at a 25% access, hiring waiters, although there are employment ripples there, buying food in restaurants, those might scale, but your rent won't scale. And one of the things that's very clear, and every person in the food service business that I've talked to, and I dare say that the same thing is going to happen for people who are renting theater spaces, that those costs are what will strangle the owners. Now, it could well be that there will be new owners poised to come in to buy damaged and reduced cost assets and then open new restaurants, and we'll see that wave. But there will be a lot of carnage in between. And to Jonathan's point, we need policymakers who are thinking very keenly right now about how to sustain businesses that we should have with us at the point that we can once again come together safely.
Mm-hmm. I want to take a few minutes here. We're almost out of time, but a few minutes here, and have each of you take a moment to just kind of tell me what you see New York looking like over the next year to 2 years. What do you think we're going to see, what we're going to look like here in our city?
I'm very optimistic about it, but I think that the fiscal issues in the short term worry me. I worry about the safety net. I worry about immigrants and people of color who have disproportionately lost their jobs, their main source of income during this pandemic. I worry that as the economy is changing and we're seeing more tech-enabled growth, some of the tech companies are growing right now, and that's good for New York, but we've got 3.5 million or so people without a bachelor's degree in this city. And a lot of people don't have the technological background to get jobs in these fields. And I think we've got to be making those kind of investments, as David was alluding to earlier, to make sure we have an inclusive recovery. We've got to make sure that as the budgets get cut, that we don't shortchange the safety net because people are in need right now. If we do have those issues and we are not making those investments, you know, I think that the city could fall into worse shape. I think we'll see more crime, and that could convince people to leave, and it could prevent young people and immigrants from coming to this city. So all of what was said, I absolutely believe that New York will stay strong, will regenerate itself, but I think the fiscal issues are what concerns me most.
Mm-hmm. Andrew.
I really don't have much of anything to add here because I agree with both of my colleagues. I would only say this is a national problem, an international problem. We're not the only city that is going to have this sort of problem. And as a result, New York as a competitor with, say, other cities like Phoenix or Jacksonville or Austin, sure, it meant there are lots of people who would prefer to live in Austin, but there are many more worldwide or even from Iowa and Idaho who do want to live in New York and are going to come despite crime, whatever else you may say is there, they're going to come. There's no stopping.
Yeah, I'm with you, Andrew. I like the beat of the city here. We have that energy and I love it. David, I'll give you the last word.
Just a couple of things. I agree with everything that Andrew and Jonathan have said. I just add a couple of things. I think that we are going to see a New York or New Yorkers who make better use of outdoors. We're seeing that now perforce, but a lot of people that I talk to really like it. The idea of having restaurants in what had been the parking lane of side streets, of closing streets on a more regular basis, of getting people together in outdoor venues. That won't be a necessity when we have a vaccine. We're past the coronavirus plague. But I think people will embrace it as a way of being. I think we'll see, and we'll see in the next mayor's policy, a smarter approach to harnessing some of the public and private assets of the city, to recognizing nonprofit organizations as partners, vital partners in the delivery of government service. Alas, we're going to see a lot of those organizations go under in the next 4 to 12 months. But try to figure out ways to make that more sustainable. And to the education point that Jonathan quite properly raised earlier, to recognize the assets represented certainly by the City University of New York, but by all of the university infrastructure in this city, which has a larger clientele collectively than Boston has people. And we think of Boston as a university town. We're going to have to be better at advertising what we do, and I think we'll look a little bit different while we're doing it.
We certainly hope the city we all love comes back to be even more vibrant and economically sound than before this awful pandemic hit. But I think this is going to take some time, some smarts, and hard work. Great discussion, though. I want to thank our guest, the Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future, Jonathan Bowles, American political scientist, author, and professor in the Department of Political Science at Queens College, Andrew Hacker, and the Dean of the Baruch College Marxe School of Public and International Affairs, David Birdsell. Thank you all for a great discussion. I'm Mike Gilliam. Thank you for joining us for our CUNY TV roundtable discussion, What is the New Normal for New York City? We'll see you next time, and stay safe, New York.